on this day, 22nd of February, 1946. The long telegram arrives in the United States from the American Embassy in Moscow, proposing how they should deal with the Soviet Union. This telegram, in many ways, would set the scene for the Cold War. The end of the Second Great War in 1945 had left the Soviet Union and its ruler, Joseph Stalin, triumphant on the world stage. In the following years, the following year up to this telegram, he was able to consolidate his control over a dozen countries in Eastern Europe. He occupied half of Germany and half of Austria. Communist parties in Italy and France were threatening to take control through the ballot box, and it is rumoured, and probably true, that it was only through various dodgy dealings and ballot stuffing that Italy and France did not elect a communist government. Communism was seen as a danger, and Stalin was seen as being ultimate baddie at this point. Stalin himself he was a psychopath, and he was also hugely paranoid. He was afraid of the Western powers, the United States and Britain, and he believed that their ultimate aim was to surround and destroy him. On the Allied side, they were wondering what the hell to do with Stalin and the Soviet Union. There were some people that wanted the wartime alliance to continue. They wanted the cooperation, economic cooperation, to continue. They wanted the Soviet Union to be a part of the Bretton Woods Agreement. They wanted the Soviet Union to be intimately involved in all of the various post-war organizations. This was never going to happen. A man called George Kennan, I think it's Keenan, maybe Kennan, was a diplomat, an American diplomat in Moscow. His warnings about the Soviet Union and about communism, he believed, were being ignored by the Truman administration and by other policymakers in Washington. He tried repeatedly to persuade people back home to abandon plans for cooperation with the Soviets in favor of encouraging a Western European federation or confederation, perhaps, and that would be the best way to counter Soviet influence in Europe. He was head of the mission in Moscow until April 46, and near the end of that term, the Treasury Department in the United States requested that the State Department explain recent Soviet behaviors. They had refused to endorse the IMF, the World Bank. They weren't getting involved with the Bretton Woods system, as I said before. And so it seemed that the Soviet Union, which was supposed to be an ally, just defeated Nazi Germany, the greatest war that had ever happened. The amount of American material, aid, money, food that had gone to the Soviet Union, you would think they would be a little bit more cooperative. Kennan responded on this day, February 22nd. He sent a 5,363 word telegram. This is why it's called the long telegram. He sent it to the Secretary of State, outlining a new strategy for diplomatic relations with the Soviet Union. He basically said that the Soviet Union has a neurotic view of world affairs, and has the traditional and instinctive Russian sense of insecurity. And mixed with that is the communism and Oriental secretiveness and conspiracy. So his point, and it was a long point, he laid out all the various things about what was wrong with the Soviet Union, about the various crimes that were being committed and had been committed, that Stalin in many ways and the communists, in order to justify and legitimize their rule, would seek to blame the outside world, say it's scary, say it's against them, and they could then close the country down, keep the foreigners out and the foreign influence out, and with that, they could remain in power. This is basically when the idea of containment became a thing. This was the Truman Doctrine. And it was Kennan and his long telegram that convinced many in government, including the president eventually, to adopt this new policy. And it was this policy which, in many ways, you could say, began the Cold War. The effects of the long telegram have been, well, they've been talked about quite a lot. Many books have been written about it, and the effect on history has been huge. Back when it was first sent, it had a massive influence on the United States government. George Kennan himself went to the Council on Foreign Relations in 1947, so a year after he sent that telegram. And he made a speech basically using the same arguments he had made in the long telegram. Certain people at the Council on Foreign Relations were very impressed with his speech and encouraged him to write an article for Foreign Affairs, the magazine that the Council on Foreign Relations releases. I think it's once every quarter. And he did so, and that, plus the effect his original telegram had on the government, had a huge effect outside of the government, in, you could say, the military-industrial complex or business. And this led directly to the foundation of NATO. It led to American support for the European Coal and Steel Union, for the European Economic Community, for the Western European Union, which was a military organization that's later on been folded into the EU, and the various numerous European institutions that were founded in the late 40s up to the late 50s. Also, one of the big effects that this long telegram had was to encourage the Americans to think outside the box, and one of the outcomes, besides NATO, besides the military, besides supporting various initiatives in Europe itself, was the Marshall Plan, in which every country was offered money if, they were all offered money. The Soviet Union refused it because they saw it as a poison chalice. There was something dodgy about this. They weren't going to just give money to you. And they understood that money would then, it's basically a bribe. So all the eastern states that were occupied and controlled by the Soviet Union refused this money. Everyone else could get their share. Now, the amount of money, it's billions or hundreds of billions, doesn't sound like very much today, even when you compare it to, you take inflation into account. It's probably because we're so used to hearing about governments printing trillions on a whim and throwing it around like confetti. But back then, you have to remember that money meant a little bit more than it does now. So the amount of money that was being given to various countries was quite a lot. And it was a huge PR win for the United States and for the West generally. People thought, well, the Americans, look, they won the war, and now they're giving us money to rebuild our societies, our countries, our industries. This was huge. America gained so much goodwill from that, which the Soviets hated. And that was probably the best thing the Americans have done, PR-wise, post-World War II. And it came from the long telegram. Later on, George Kennan would actually start opposing the more aggressive policy that the United States was taking towards the Soviet Union. He would come to the opinion that the United States and the Soviet Union could get on. They could negotiate, maybe even cooperate. But he was sidelined, and he ended up resigning from the State Department. He remained involved in think tanks, and he actually lived till 2005. He was 101 years old when he died. But this one thing he did at that perfect moment in 1946 meant that he had an outsized influence on American foreign policy and on the direction of world history from that point up until the end of the Cold War. So it was on this day, the long telegram was sent from Moscow to Washington. If you like these videos, come back for more tomorrow. Like, subscribe, and leave a comment.